Hello, hello. Do not panic. You haven't missed today's Tuesday Tea-ology. I'm just late. But here we are. Better late than never on this Tuesday in the afternoon, drinking Taylor's of Harrogate English breakfast tea. It is it's good, robust English breakfast tea. I do recommend this. Is somewhat new for me. I mean, I've been into various of their teas for a while, but for some reason hadn't really gotten around to the English breakfast. Maybe it seemed just a little too standard, not as exotic as the Scottish breakfast or the Irish breakfast, but it's working for me. Like the others, as I said, it is a robust, a strong English breakfast, so do check it out. Taylor's of Harrogate. Mm. And we have been unfolding the wonderful redeeming work of God. And in that story of redemption, which has its climax, its decisive point at the coming and the work of Christ, the triune redeeming work, as the Father sends the Son by the Spirit for our redemption, and as Jesus Christ, the Son of God incarnate, gave up his life for us on the cross and rose to bring us life, the wonderful story of the gospel. But it is led to by the long story of redemption, which pointed forward and prepared the way. And we have come to the theme of the kingship. God is king. He is king of the universe, and he is bringing his people back to his lordship. Sin is about rebellion. It is about refusing the great God of the universe and instead trying to put ourselves in that place. And so the restoration from sin is about restoring, being restored to God as his servants, as his people, as the sons and daughters of the kingdom. And so the theme of kingship is one of the things leading up to the climax of the gospel, and which Jesus fulfilled. And this is usually seen particularly in the role of the king. God was to be the king of his people, but there was a rejection of God, which is hinted at in the book of Judges by the recurring phrase towards the end. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit, which occurs in variations towards the end. And also then when we come to the institution of the monarchy and the people ask for a king, and the judge, prophet, priest of that time, Samuel, is distraught, and God says they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me as their king. And so that underlines it, that God is supposed to be the king of his people. But this theme also is expressed in other leaders and deliverers who saved God's people, in leaders like Moses, who was used to rescue the people out of slavery in Egypt, in the judges, who, while not kings, had a very similar kind of role in certain respects. They were military leaders and who delivered Israel from their enemies, and also in an office of the Redeemer that was designed in the law, the Redeemer or kinsman Redeemer, as it's called. And if you read the Old Testament law, you see that this is in the structure, because a law, a legal code, needs not just regulations, but also enforcement. And enforcement was largely left up to the community in general. That the whole community had charge of the enforcement of the law, and of course also, as the law pertained to things that were sins against God. Of course, the enforcement, the punishment of sin, is not primarily a matter of a justice system in this life. It is primarily a matter of God's judgment on that last day. So that is a factor as well. But there were particular agents of law enforcement, as we might say, or pertaining to the enforcement of laws, and these were the kinsman redeemers. So it was done on a familial basis. The family ties were incredibly strong in their culture. Not nearly so individualistic as in the modern West, and your place in your family and your tribe that was connected with where you lived. And remember, the land was kind of kept within families, as it were. And there were various circumstances where there was no one whose full-time job would be to do this or that. Government employees per se didn't exist in the law as instituted. They only came about later when the people demanded and finally were given a king. But in the law as instituted, there were certain enforcers of things, these kinsmen redeemers, and they had various jobs related to this business of redemption. The most fundamental one was that a kinsman redeemer would be responsible for redeeming, for getting back things that had been lost. So if if you become impoverished, and this is in the Old Testament law, you can read about it, and you're forced to sell some of your land, uh, it can't be permanently sold. It's only sort of rented out until what's called the year of Jubilee, and then it returns to those to whom it belongs. But also, if you have a kinsman who is better off, they are supposed to redeem it for the family. They are supposed to. So that's one mechanism of just taking care of your family members, that those who are materially doing better should provide for those who are poorer. And then, particularly, if you should get so poor that you are selling not just the land, but selling yourself. You see that there was an institution of slavery in that time, as in many times and places in the world, and it could involve that if you got poor enough, you might sell yourself as a slave in order to pay your debts. And so if you were in that tragic position where you had to surrender your freedom in order to make up for your poverty, your kinsman redeemer, some near kinsman, was supposed to redeem you, that is, paying the price for your freedom. And this becomes one of the uh, key images for what Christ has done, this matter of redemption. And now when it comes to the New Testament and stuff, they may be looking a little more at the context in the Greco-Roman world, but it was along similar lines, that if you became a slave, whether by selling yourself or by warfare, you could be redeemed by the payment of a price. And Jesus on the cross paid the price for our redemption, for our restoration to God. So this image of a redeemer then enters into the lead up to the work of Christ. And another area in which the kinsman redeemer would come then was in so these are enforcement of restoration kind of mechanisms, but also in the enforcement of what we would call criminal justice, in the case particularly of murder. The other side of the Redeemer is as the avenger of blood. The near kinsman also is supposed to. He's the one charged with putting a murderer to death. Now, the community also has certain responsibilities, but so these are done along family lines, in the enforcement of justice. So there's two-sided judgment and restoration aspects of the Redeemer. And we don't see a lot of details of this working out in the biblical story. It's related in the law, but one area where it comes to the fore is in the book of Ruth. And this sits right in between it's in the tumultuous period of the Judges. So it's between, at the end of the book of Judges, you've read how there's no king in Israel, everyone's doing as he sees fit, and there's this terrible injustice. And then coming into the book of First Samuel, you get to the institution of the king. And between them sits the little book of Ruth. And the little book of Ruth has as one of its themes this work of a redeemer. And the redeemer role is fulfilled by Boaz. He is a righteous man. He is the literal kinsman redeemer. He is a near kinsman who steps up to his responsibilities. There's a nearer kinsman redeemer who's actually supposed to do it, but he is shirking his responsibility. So Boaz confronts him and gets him to turn over the responsibilities to him. So Boaz is the literal kinsman redeemer, and he embraces his responsibility, and he redeems these widows, Ruth and Naomi, by providing for them, by marrying Ruth, and then they have a child, and the child is counted as Naomi's child because her husband, the sons have perished, and he's the one carrying on the family name. And this child is actually referred to as her redeemer, just by existing. He is her redeemer, but he will be the one who will care for her as he then grows and comes to inherit the family land and so on. But even within this book of Ruth, and within the lead up and the presence of the Redeemer, Boaz, and the Redeemer who is born to them, and eventually that would lead to the line of David, the king, which eventually would lead to Jesus Christ, the Savior. But even within there also is a pointer to God as the Redeemer. God as the one who watches over his people. In chapter 2 of the book of Ruth, she is this young widow. She is taking the initiative to try to provide for herself and her mother-in-law, Naomi. She's going out into the field. She's taking advantage of the provision in the law that the poor people could go behind the gatherers and pick up what is left over, so on. And as she is showing this real initiative in pursuing taking care of them, Boaz, who wants to bless her and is showing his kindness to her, speaks to her about um, how impressed he is and stuff. And one thing he says, so Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So he recognizes that here, even though she may seem to be an outcast, she has come to take refuge under God's wings. And as the story goes on, we see that God provides, that Boaz himself ends up being God's instrument to provide for them. But it is all in God's providential plan that he cares for those who take refuge in him. And this is then particularly realized, we trace it on through the history of God's saving work in Jesus Christ, in God the Son, who came for us and lived for us, died for us, rose for us, reigns for us, will return to bring things to their conclusion. And those who take refuge in him will be blessed and find in him redemption from sin and from death, from all the hurts of this world. And so that theme of a redeemer in the book of Ruth eventually brought to its climax in Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, our Savior and Lord. Well, may God bless you as you go through your day on this cloudy afternoon, late July, about to turn into August. May the Lord be with you and care for you in every way. God bless.